And welcome to What America's Thinking, where we discuss key elections, demographic trends, and public opinion. I'm Julia Manchester.
And I'm Rafael Bernal.
With less than 20 days to go before the midterm elections, Democrats and Republicans are making their final plea to voters, especially in battleground states. And today, we're setting our sights on Ohio and Nevada for today's top lines. Let's first talk about the Buckeye State.
Right, so the latest Hill Emerson College poll shows that the Senate race in Ohio is in a dead heat. 46% of voters said they choose Republican candidate J.D. Vance, while 45% say they'll cast their ballots for Democrat Tim Ryan. Here to help us break down what's going on in Ohio is Spencer Kimball, director of the Emerson poll. Welcome back, Spencer.
Great to see you. Thanks for having me.
So we have a state where that presidentially has pretty much turned into a red state, and it might be on the verge of having two Democratic senators, or at least it's competitive. What's going on here?
Yeah, so it's interesting in Ohio. Obviously, you have the governor's race where the Republican DeWine has a pretty healthy lead. But in the Senate race, it's still a toss-up. And what we're seeing is that Ryan has been able to increase his vote total while Vance has kind of held steady at 46%. So voters are still taking a look at these candidates, but Vance hasn't been able to move his numbers. Ryan was able to move his going into that last poll.
Right, and Spencer, looking at various polls, not just the Emerson College poll, there seems to be a huge gap between the Senate race and the gubernatorial race. You have such a tight Senate race between the Republican and the Democrat. Obviously, it's an open seat, so you have two newcomers coming to this Senate seat. But on the gubernatorial side, you have incumbent Republican Governor Mike DeWine leading incredibly, having an incredible lead ahead of Nan Whaley. Why is that? Do you think that's potentially because of his incumbent's advantage?
Yeah, so the incumbency advantage is obviously a big factor in name recognition. Nan Whaley lacks some of the funding to get that name recognition up. But I also think that coming out of COVID, a lot of the governors were able to use that platform to really enhance their brand. And we're seeing this around the country where incumbent governors have been doing fairly well. Now, the problem that Tim Ryan has is that you've got this popular Republican governor, so you're going to need a lot of ticket splitting for him to be successful.
So you mentioned that J.D. Vance hasn't been able to move his numbers. Tim Ryan has moved his numbers. We've talked about this before. Democrats need a high turnout election. Are you getting any information from, like we saw a lot of voters come out for early voting in Georgia. What's that looking like in Ohio?
Well, we haven't seen those early numbers in Ohio, but as you mentioned, you can see early numbers in Georgia. You can see early numbers in Arizona. And right now, we're not seeing anything that is kind of suggesting that there's going to be a large Democratic turnout. We're not seeing the young vote come out at very strong numbers. We're not seeing minority votes coming out at disproportionately strong numbers. And so the polling has suggested that the Democrats have a little less motivation coming into this election than the Republicans. But obviously the issue like abortion access might be percolating underneath, and that might motivate some folks to the polls that right now are sitting on the sideline.
Yeah, and according to the poll, the economy is the most important issue in determining the vote. 45% of Ohio voters say the economy, followed by threats to democracy at 15% and abortion access at 13%. How are these issues determining voters' choices? I mean, this week we've seen polling, including one poll from the New York Times and Siena College, that would suggest that very much like this poll, it's the economy, whereas abortion seems like a secondary issue further down the list.
Oh, yes, it is the economy. That is the top issue, not just in Ohio, but generally across the country until you basically get out to Oregon and Washington, where we start seeing some different issues percolating up there. So when we look at the economy, we have to ask what about the economy is driving it, and inflation seems to be the biggest issue. And with that, generally speaking, Republicans are seen better on the issue of inflation, so they seem to be winning on the economic conditions. When you look at the abortion access, that's overwhelmingly supported by Democrats. But as you mentioned, it's only about a third or a quarter as important as the economic issues are. So while the Democrats do have an issue with abortion access, the Republicans have a much stronger issue with the economy, and that's what Vance is hoping to be able to carry the day with.
So right now we're zeroing in on inflation when it comes to the economy, but there's a little trick, I guess, almost a November surprise. The next jobs report is due 4 days before the election on November 4th. The election's on November 8th. Do you think Democrats are well prepared for the coming news on inflation over the next 20 days and whatever that jobs report is going to show us?
The Democrats are in a tough position, in my opinion, looking at some of our polls, not just here, but tracking it over the last 11 months. They seem to have peaked about 2-3 weeks ago. And so even some of these numbers, I think, are at the highlight of where the Democrats were when the gas prices were coming down, people were returning to school. Right now, what we're finding in our numbers is nearly 2/3 of voters are buying less at the grocery store because they can't afford it. And when you start to see this economic conditions percolating up, it makes a big concern for the Democrats that they've lost some momentum, and you don't want to have all the wind in your face come election day.
So last week, Ryan and Vance faced off on the debate stage. Let's listen to some of that.
During the insurrection, when they tried to overthrow the government, beat them upside the head with lead pipes, spray them with pepper spray. The one video we saw, the cop got jammed into the door, right? J.D. Vance raised money for the legal defense fund of the insurrectionists. This is the kind of extremism, J.D., that we wholly reject. You have video posts. Don't even try to deny it. We got your Twitter posts and everything else. Everybody's seen it. He said, help these guys with their legal defense fund. Now, can you imagine one guy saying out of one side of his mouth he's pro-cop, and out of the other side of his mouth he's raising money for the insurrectionists who were beating up the Capitol Police?
Look, I've always believed in reasonable exceptions. This is a misrepresentation of my view, but let's hear it from me, not from Congressman Ryan. I absolutely think the 10-year-old girl, the case that we've, of course, heard a lot about, an incredibly tragic situation. I mean, look, I've got a 9-year-old baby girl at home. I cannot imagine what that's like for the girl, for her family. God forbid something like that would happen. I have said repeatedly on the record that I think that girl should be able to get an abortion if she and her family so choose to do so. But let's talk about that case. Because why was a 10-year-old girl raped in our community, raped in our state in the first place? The thing the media and Congressman Ryan, they talk about this all the time. The thing they never mentioned is that poor girl was raped by an illegal alien, somebody that should have never been in this state in the first place. You voted so many times against border wall funding, so many times for amnesty, Tim. If you had done your job, she would have never been raped in the first place. Do your job on border security. Don't lecture me about opinions I don't actually have.
So a number of issues covered in those responses from Congressman Ryan and J.D. Vance. We went from abortion to border security in that exchange. But, I'm curious, Spencer, Ohio is not a border state. We hear that border issues are talked about quite a bit in states like Nevada, Arizona, Texas, so on and so forth. But it seems like a lot of Republican candidates and even some Democratic candidates, Maggie Hassan in New Hampshire, for example, have been talking about the border. So how well do you think this issue is going to, translate to voters maybe who aren't directly on the border or close to the border?
So lots to unpack from that debate. Talking about the immigration issue, that's one where the Republicans use generally as red meat to get their base excited and get them to come out. And so a couple of weeks ago, when you started to see the Governor DeSantis, Governor Abbott of Texas and Florida starting to bus migrants around the country, I thought that this could start becoming a bigger campaign issue. And obviously, we're seeing it play out, as you mentioned. The Democratic candidate incumbent in New Hampshire, Maggie Hassan, is running on closing the borders, tightening immigration policy positions, which raises an eyebrow in a state that Biden wins by 7. So immigration is one of the top issues that President Trump used in his announcement to run for president. It helps galvanize a base of Republican supporters. So no surprise to see Vance pivot over to that issue. Even in a state like Ohio that is miles away from the border, the Republicans are pretty successful in creating it as a personal narrative. On the flip side, I think Tim Ryan does a good job putting Vance into the January 6th issue, because when we talk about January 6th, even amongst Republicans, there is a disgust about what occurred that day. And so to try to line him up with that activity, it was a smart move on his part. So you can start to see how both candidates are trying to angle the messages in the issues of the campaign to benefit their candidacy.
So in terms of personality, these two went pretty hard at it on the debate stage. It's clear these are two candidates who do not like each other. Tim Ryan basically painted J.D. Vance as a coastal elite carpetbagger, and J.D. Vance returned the favor, saying that tying Tim Ryan to Nancy Pelosi. This sort of personal fight, this fight that has become personal, is that playing out in any way with Ohio voters? Are they picking favorites that we can tell?
Well, we're certainly looking at the favorability questions, the name recognition, and generally when we do see both sides getting ugly, we notice that both sides' unfavorables will go up. Nobody wants to watch two friends fight. And so what voters are watching, and it explains why Tim Ryan would put out an ad with his wife, which was a much softer ad, didn't talk about the issues, because he's trying to win back some of that favorable opinion that he's built up over his career. And we'll see that play, over the next couple of weeks. But I just want to say, watching all of these debates around the country, they're all like this. They're all very intense, very high stakes. If we watch the Val Demings, Marco Rubio debate down in Florida, or we're going to see the Walker Warnock debate in Georgia, and next week we'll see the Oz and Fetterman debate in Pennsylvania. Some states, they're not even debating, like in Nevada, where the candidates can't even get on the stage together. So unfortunately, this is part of our deliberative process, but the debates have gotten intense, and I think the voters are kind of getting a little turned off by that.
Yeah, even in Utah, where the challenger is not even a Democrat. So Spencer, thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure. Look forward to doing it again.
All right, well, stay tuned, and we'll be right back to talk about the other closely watched race in the swing state, Nevada. Stay with us.